Commander Sarah Chen had seen many strange things during her 15 years aboard the deep space research vessel Harmony *. But nothing quite prepared her for the sight that greeted her when the emergency beacon led them to the drifting escape pod near the Kepler 442 system. The pod was unlike anything in the galactic database. Its hull was a deep purple metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing with a soft blue radiance that pulsed like a heartbeat. Most concerning of all, the pod was venting some kind of toxic gas that their sensors couldn't identify. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Rodriguez from the sensor station, "the life signs inside are weak but stable. Whatever's in there is alive but barely." Sarah frowned as she studied the readings. The Galactic Council had strict protocols about unknown species. First contact required approval from 3 separate committees, extensive quarantine procedures, and months of bureaucratic red tape. But the being inside that pod was dying. "Ma'am," said Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the ship's chief medical officer, "if we don't bring that pod aboard in the next hour, whatever's inside won't survive. The life support systems are failing." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew the regulations. Unknown species were to be reported to the nearest council station and kept at a safe distance until proper authorities arrived. The last ship that had violated this protocol had been stripped of its exploration license and its crew court-martialed. But Sarah had joined the space service to help people, not to watch them die because of paperwork. "Bring it aboard," she ordered. "Medical Bay 3, full quarantine protocols." "Captain," warned her first officer, Commander Park, "the Council will have our heads for this. Then we better make sure this alien survives to make it worth it." The next few hours were tense. The medical team worked carefully to extract the being from its pod while maintaining full environmental isolation. Dr. Hayes had seen dozens of different alien species during her career, but this one was unlike anything in the medical textbooks. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall with 6 limbs, 4 that functioned as arms and 2 powerful legs. Its skin was a deep green that shifted to purple at the joints, covered in small scales that gleamed like jewels. Most striking were its eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle on its elongated head, each one a different color: golden yellow, deep blue, and silver white. "Remarkable," Dr. Hayes whispered as she reviewed the scans. "Its biology is completely unique. 3 hearts, 2 separate nervous systems, and this respiratory system that can process almost any atmospheric mixture. I've never seen anything like it." But the alien wasn't responding to any form of communication. It lay unconscious on the medical table, its 3 hearts beating in a complex rhythm that the monitors struggled to track. Worse, its body temperature was dropping despite all their efforts to stabilize it. "Captain," Dr. Hayes called over the intercom, "I think it's dying of loneliness." Sarah rushed to the medical bay. "What do you mean?" "Look at these neural patterns." The doctor pointed to a complex display of brain activity. "There's a section of its brain that's completely dark. In humans, this would be the area associated with social connection and emotional bonding. I think this species requires some kind of social contact to survive, and it's been alone in that pod for weeks." "So what do we do?" "Someone needs to stay with it. Physical presence might be enough to activate those dormant neural pathways." Sarah looked at the alien lying motionless on the table. Despite its strange appearance, there was something peaceful about its face, almost childlike. She made a decision that would change not just her life, but the fate of the entire galaxy. "I'll stay." "Captain, we don't know if it's safe." "It's dying, Elizabeth. Sometimes you have to take risks to do what's right." For the next 48 hours, Sarah barely left the alien's side. She talked to it, read to it from human literature, and even played music from Earth. Slowly, its neural patterns began to change. The dark areas of its brain started showing activity, and its 3 hearts began beating in a stronger, more synchronized rhythm. On the 3rd day, it opened its eyes. The golden eye focused on Sarah first, followed by the blue one, and finally the silver. When all 3 eyes locked onto her face, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before, a warm presence in her mind, gentle and curious. "Thank you," came a voice in her head, clear as if someone had spoken aloud. "You saved me when your kind had no reason to." Sarah nearly jumped out of her chair. "You can speak telepathically." "My name is Zephi of the Cathara. And yes, though it seems my thoughts translate into your language patterns automatically. Curious. The alien HFY slowly sat up on the medical table. Your species is not in the galactic database. Who are you? Humans, we call ourselves humans. I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Harmony HFY's three eyes widened in what Sarah somehow knew was surprise. Earth, the restricted world, but the Council declared your system off-limits after the probe incidents. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What probe incidents? Forgive me, I assumed you knew. HFY's mental voice carried notes of sadness. 40 of your years ago, the Council sent exploration probes to your system. When they discovered intelligent life, there was disagreement about what to do. Some wanted to make contact. Others feared your species' apparent aggressive nature. Apparent aggressive nature? The probes observed your military conflicts, your environmental destruction, your tendency toward violence. The Council voted to classify humanity as a dangerous species to be contained within your own system. No contact was to be made. Sarah's mind raced. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. To learn that not only were they not alone, but that they had been deliberately isolated by a galactic government was staggering. But you're telling me this, she said. Aren't you violating some kind of law? HFY's head tilted in what might have been the equivalent of a shrug. I am already an outcast among my people. What is one more violation? Outcast, why? For a moment, HFY's mental presence pulled back, and Sarah could sense deep pain. I am what your language might call a truth-seer. I can perceive the true nature of beings, see past deceptions and false facades. Among my people, this was considered a dangerous gift. That sounds useful. Not when you reveal that the High Council's most respected members are corrupt, or when you expose lies that certain groups prefer to keep hidden. I became inconvenient. The pod you found me in was not an escape pod, Captain Chen. It was my prison. Sarah felt anger building in her chest. They tried to execute you. In a way, exile to the void is considered a clean death among the Cathara, no blood on anyone's hands. HFY's three eyes focused on her with an intensity that made Sarah's skin tingle. But you chose to save me despite your own laws forbidding contact with unknown species. You risked everything for someone you had never met. This is not the behavior of a dangerous species. Most humans would have done the same thing. Most humans, there was wonder in HFY's mental voice. You believe this. I know it, we have a saying. We judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. But when we see someone in need, most of us try to help regardless of who they are. HFY was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his mental voice was filled with something Sarah could only describe as hope. Captain Chen, what if I told you that I could help your species take its place in the galactic community? What if I told you that the Council's assessment of humanity was based on incomplete information and prejudice? I'd say that sounds too good to be true. With my truth-seeing abilities, I can prove to the Council that they made an error. But it would require your help, and it would be dangerous for both our species. Sarah looked at this strange alien who had already changed everything she thought she knew about humanity's place in the universe. Despite the risks, despite the unknown consequences, she felt that familiar pull toward doing what was right rather than what was safe. What do you need us to do? First, I need to heal completely. Then we must travel to the Council homeworld of Nexus Prime. There, I will demand a formal review of humanity's classification. But Captain. Yes. Once we begin this path, there will be no turning back. Forces within the Council profit from keeping certain species isolated and afraid. They will not welcome our challenge to their authority. Sarah thought about Earth, about the billions of humans who had no idea they were part of a larger galactic community. They deserved the chance to join that community, to share their knowledge and culture with other species, and to learn from them in return. How long do you need to recover? 2 of your weeks, perhaps 3. Then we have time to prepare. Sarah activated her communicator. Commander Park, please join me in Medical Bay 3. We need to discuss a change in our mission parameters. You are certain of this decision? Sarah looked at HFY, this being who had been cast out by his own people for telling the truth, and who was now offering to risk everything to help a species he barely knew. Someone once told me that doing what's right is rarely the same as doing what's safe. Besides, she smiled. I have a feeling humanity and the Cathara have more in common than either of our peoples realize. Over the next week, as Zephi recovered his strength, he shared more about galactic civilization. The Council governed over 2,000 member species across 12 spiral arms of the galaxy. Trade, technology, and cultural exchange flowed freely between member worlds, while non-member species like humanity remained isolated in their home systems. The process for gaining Council membership usually takes centuries, Zephi explained, as Sarah brought him human food to try. A species must demonstrate technological advancement, social stability, and peaceful intentions over multiple generations. But you think humanity can bypass that process? I think the process itself is flawed. Zephi carefully tasted the apple Sarah had brought him, his 3 eyes closing in what seemed to be pleasure. This fruit, the complexity of flavors, remarkable. How many varieties do you grow? Thousands, we have a saying. Variety is the spice of life. Yes, this is what the Council fails to understand. They seek uniformity, predictability, species that fit neat categories and follow established patterns. Humanity is chaotic in the most beautiful way. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Chaotic. Your species discovered fire, agriculture, and writing independently in multiple locations. You developed dozens of different languages, hundreds of distinct cultures, thousands of unique art forms. Most species follow linear development. Humanity exploded in every direction at once. The Council sees that as dangerous. Some do. They prefer species that develop along predictable lines that can be easily understood and categorized. But I have seen the truth of what lies beneath human nature. Zephi's 3 eyes focused on her with that intense gaze. Humans don't just adapt to their environment. They adapt their environment to themselves, then adapt themselves to the new environment they created. It's unprecedented. Is that good or bad? It's revolutionary, and revolution makes the old guard nervous. Dr. Hayes entered the medical bay carrying a tablet full of test results. How are you feeling today, Zephi? Much stronger, thank you. Captain Chen's company has been healing. That's what I wanted to talk to you both about. Dr. Hayes pulled up a chair. I've been studying Zephi's biology, and I've discovered something remarkable. His species doesn't just require social contact to survive. They're empathically linked to those they form bonds with. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What does that mean? It means, Zephi said quietly, that I have been unconsciously bonding with you, Captain. Among my people, such bonds are considered sacred, but they are also permanent. Permanent how? Dr. Hayes consulted her tablet. From what I can determine, you and Zephi now share a partial emotional and mental connection. You'll be able to sense each other's presence across vast distances, feel echoes of each other's emotions, and in times of stress, you might even share thoughts directly. Sarah sat down hard in her chair. You're saying we're psychically linked? In a limited way, yes. And according to Zephi's biology, the bond will only strengthen over time. I am sorry, came Zephi's voice in her mind. I should have warned you of the risk. Among my people, such bonding requires consent from both parties. I did not realize it was happening until it was too late to stop. Sarah felt the alien's genuine remorse and guilt flowing through their connection. But underneath those emotions, she sensed something else, a deep loneliness that had been with Zephi for so long that it had become part of his identity, and the warm relief of no longer being alone. It's okay, she said aloud. I chose to stay with you. I accept the consequences of that choice. You are not disturbed by this development. Zephi, you're the first member of an alien species that humanity has ever met. You're offering to help us join a galactic community we never knew existed, and you're willing to risk your life to correct an injustice. A psychic bond with someone like you? I can think of worse fates. For the first time since awakening, Zephi made a sound with his vocal cords, a harmonious humming that Dr. Hayes's instruments indicated was a sign of deep contentment among his species. Besides, Sarah added with a grin, if we're going to challenge the most powerful government in the galaxy, it might be useful to have a teammate I can communicate with telepathically. Indeed, Captain Chen, you continue to surprise me. Just wait until you meet the rest of humanity. We're full of surprises. That, came Zephi's amused mental voice, is exactly what I am counting on. As the asterisk harmony continued its course toward Nexus Prime, Sarah found herself looking forward to the challenges ahead. She had saved an alien's life and gained not just a friend, but a partner in what might be the most important mission in human history. She just hoped that humanity was ready for what was coming next. 3 weeks later, the Harmony dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus Prime system, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had thought Earth's cities were impressive, but they were nothing compared to what lay before them. Nexus Prime wasn't just a planet, it was a constructed world, a massive sphere 3 times the size of Earth, covered in gleaming towers that stretched into space. Orbital platforms surrounded the planet like artificial moons, each one larger than most space stations. Ships of every conceivable design moved between the platforms in carefully controlled traffic patterns that looked like a 3-dimensional dance. "By the void," whispered Lieutenant Rodriguez, "how many people live there?" "Approximately 400 billion, came Zephai's mental voice as he joined them on the bridge. He had spent the past week learning to walk normally again, and Sarah noticed that his 3 eyes now tracked movement with their old sharpness. Representatives from nearly every council species maintain permanent embassies there. "And we're just going to fly up to them and ask for a meeting?" asked Commander Park. "Not exactly," Sarah replied. She had spent countless hours with Zephai planning their approach. Zephai still has certain legal rights as a Cathara citizen. He can demand what's called a truth hearing before the High Council. "Though I should warn you," Zephai added, his mental voice carrying notes of concern. "Such hearings are rarely granted, and never for matters the Council considers closed." "What makes you think they'll listen?" Dr. Hayes asked. Zephai's 3 eyes focused on a point in space, and Sarah felt a complex mix of determination and fear through their bond. "Because I am going to tell them something that will terrify them." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the communications panel lit up with an incoming message. The main screen flickered, then showed the face of a being Sarah didn't recognize, humanoid, but with silver skin and completely black eyes. "Unidentified vessel, you are entering restricted space. Identify yourself and state your business." Sarah stepped forward. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Harmony *. We request safe passage to Nexus Prime." The being's black eyes widened. "Earth? Impossible. That system is under quarantine restriction 7 Alpha. No ships from that sector are authorized for travel. We carry a Cathara citizen who requests emergency audience with the High Council." "Stand by." The screen went black and Sarah felt Zephai's tension through their bond. "They are checking the legal databases," he explained. "What we are requesting is unusual." 10 minutes later, the screen flickered back to life, this time showing a different being, one with blue-green skin and large, multifaceted eyes like an insect's. "I am Sub-Administrator Vexthal of the Council Reception Authority. You claim to carry a Cathara citizen." Zephai stepped into view of the camera, and Sarah heard the administrator make a sound that their universal translator couldn't interpret. "Zephai of the 4th Circle, but you were declared dead 3 cycles ago." "Reports of my death were premature," Zephai replied, his mental voice somehow transmitting through the ship's communication system. "I formally request a truth hearing before the High Council regarding the classification of the species known as humanity." Sub-Administrator Vexthal's compound eyes seemed to focus and unfocus rapidly. "This is unprecedented. Truth hearings for species classification can only be requested by—" Oh my. "You see the legal problem," Zephai observed with what Sarah was learning to recognize as satisfaction. "What legal problem?" Sarah asked quietly. "Truth hearings for species classification can only be requested by members of the species in question, or by a council citizen who has formed a formal advocate bond with a member of that species." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "An advocate bond." "Which is exactly what has formed between us. By council law, I am now legally required to represent humanity's interests, and the council is legally required to hear our petition." Sub-Administrator Vexthal was clearly consulting with others off-screen. When he returned his attention to them, his voice carried a tone of resignation. "Very well, you are granted safe passage to Station Omega-7. A formal hearing will be convened within 1 standard cycle. Be advised that your ship will be under constant surveillance, and any deviation from assigned flight paths will result in immediate containment." Understood, Sarah replied. We'll follow your guidance. As the asterisk Harmony was escorted toward one of the smaller orbital platforms, Commander Park pulled Sarah aside. Captain, are you sure about this? We're one ship with a crew of 43 heading into the heart of an alien government that has deliberately kept humanity isolated for decades. If this goes wrong... If this goes wrong, we'll face the consequences, Sarah replied. But if it goes right, we'll have changed the course of human history. Station Omega-7 was smaller than the others they had passed, but it was still larger than any structure humans had ever built. As the asterisk Harmony docked, Sarah could see dozens of other ships from species she couldn't identify. The variety was staggering. Some ships looked like they had been grown rather than built. Others appeared to be made of pure crystal, and a few seemed to shift and change shape even as she watched. Welcome to galactic civilization. Asterisk Zephai's mental voice carried a mix of pride and nervousness. Try not to stare. Some species consider prolonged eye contact an act of aggression. The docking procedures took 3 hours, involving scans that analyzed everything from their ship's hull composition to the bacteria in their air recycling systems. Finally, they were cleared to disembark. Sarah had decided to keep the landing party small herself: Zephai, Dr. Hayes for medical support, and Lieutenant Rodriguez for security. As they stepped off their ship, they were met by a delegation of 3 beings who looked like they belonged in 3 different fairy tales. The first was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to be made of flowing water and eyes like stars. The second was short and stocky, with rocky skin and glowing veins of what looked like molten metal. The third defied easy description. It seemed to be made of geometric shapes that constantly rearranged themselves while maintaining a roughly humanoid form. The tall one is Lyrian of the Aqueous Collective, Zephai explained mentally. The short one is Granite who sings of the Stoneheart Alliance. The geometric one is difficult to translate, something like shifting pattern that contemplates of the Flux State Union. Welcome to Nexus Prime, said Lyrian, her voice like the sound of gentle waves. I am to serve as your liaison during your stay. Please understand that as representatives of an unrecognized species, you will have limited access to station facilities. We understand, Sarah replied. We're grateful for any accommodation. Granite Who Sings spoke in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together, but the universal translator rendered it as perfectly clear speech. Your species is young. We have reviewed available data. You have barely begun to explore your own system. They're trying to intimidate you, came Zephai's mental voice. Stand your ground. Every species was young once, Sarah replied calmly. Age doesn't necessarily correlate with wisdom. The geometric beings' shapes rearranged themselves in what might have been surprise. An interesting perspective. Come, we will escort you to your quarters. As they walked through the station's corridors, Sarah tried to take in everything without appearing to gawk. The station was a marvel of engineering and art combined. The walls seemed to be alive with flowing patterns of light, and the air carried scents from a dozen different worlds. Beings of every imaginable description moved through the corridors, some walking, some floating, some appearing to phase in and out of visible existence. Do you see now why the Council fears humanity? Zephai asked as they passed a group of beings that looked like living crystals, engaged in animated conversation with creatures that resembled Earth dolphins, but with 6 fins and telepathic abilities. All of these species developed according to predictable patterns. Their technology, their society, their very evolution followed paths that the Council could study, understand, and ultimately control. But humanity. Humanity is chaotic, Sarah finished quietly. Beautifully chaotic, and chaos is the enemy of control. Their quarters were spacious, but clearly designed for a variety of physiologies. The furniture could be reconfigured for different body types, and the environmental controls allowed for adjustments in gravity, atmosphere, and temperature. Dr. Hayes immediately began taking readings to ensure the air was safe for human lungs. The hearing will take place tomorrow at the 7th cycle, Lyrian explained. Zephai of the Cathara will be permitted to present his petition before the High Council. However, I must warn you, truth hearings are intense experiences. How so? Dr. Hayes asked. It was Granite Who Sings who answered. The truth chamber uses technology that makes deception impossible. Every word spoken is analyzed for honesty. Every emotion is laid bare. Many beings find the experience unpleasant. Their hopping will back down *Zephi observed. Among most species, the fear of having one's thoughts and feelings completely exposed is enough to prevent truth-hearing requests. Will it cause any harm? Sarah asked. Physical harm, no, the geometric being replied, its shapes now forming what might have been a pattern of concern. Psychological harm, that depends on how much you fear your own truths. After the liaison team left, Sarah and her people gathered in the main room to discuss strategy. I don't like this, Lieutenant Rodriguez said bluntly. They're obviously trying to intimidate us before we even get to the hearing. Of course they are, Dr. Hayes agreed. But think about what Zephi told us. If this truth chamber really does make deception impossible, then we have an advantage. We're telling the truth about humanity's intentions. That is the hope, Zephi said, settling into a chair that reconfigured itself to accommodate his six-limbed frame. But you must understand the Council has believed their own propaganda about humanity for 40 years. Even when faced with truth, beings can be reluctant to admit they were wrong. So what exactly are we going to tell them? Sarah asked. Zephi's three eyes focused on her, with that intense gaze she had grown to recognize as his thinking expression. We are going to tell them about the bond between us. We are going to explain how a supposedly dangerous species risked everything to save a dying alien. And then we are going to show them something that will change their entire understanding of human nature. Which is... Tomorrow, in the Truth Chamber, I am going to share with the High Council exactly what I see when I look at humanity with my truth-seeing abilities. They will experience, directly and without filter, the true nature of human compassion, creativity, and moral courage. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You can do that. In the Truth Chamber, with the amplification technology they use, yes. Every member of the High Council will see and feel what I see when I look at humans. They will understand that their assessment was based on fear and misunderstanding rather than fact. And if they don't like what they see... Zephi was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his mental voice carried a weight that made Sarah's chest tighten. Then we will have learned that the galaxy's government is too corrupt to allow humanity the chance it deserves. And we will need to find another way to ensure your species' future among the stars. That night, Sarah lay awake on the alien bed, staring out the viewport at the incredible sight of Nexus Prime. Somewhere on that constructed world, beings from 2,000 different species lived and worked together, sharing knowledge and culture that humanity could barely imagine. Tomorrow, they would either open the door to that incredible community, or learn that some doors were meant to stay closed. Through their bond, she could feel Zephi's own sleeplessness, and the deep conviction that had driven him to risk everything for a species he had known for less than a month. Are you afraid? She asked mentally. Terrified came his honest reply, but fear is not reason enough to avoid doing what is right. That's a very human sentiment. Perhaps, or perhaps righteousness is not unique to humanity. Perhaps it is simply rare enough that when it appears, it should be cherished rather than feared. Sarah smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or disaster, but tonight, she was content to know that humanity would face its future with a friend by their side. Rest, Sarah Chen. Tomorrow we change the galaxy. No pressure, she replied with mental laughter. None at all. The Truth Chamber was nothing like Sarah had expected. She had imagined something sterile and technological, perhaps like a courtroom with advanced scanning equipment. Instead, she found herself standing in what appeared to be a living organism. The walls pulsed with a gentle rhythm, and the floor beneath her feet felt warm and slightly yielding, like flesh. Bioluminescent veins ran throughout the structure, carrying patterns of light that seemed to respond to the emotions of those present. Most unsettling of all, the chamber seemed to be breathing. This is Kethmoran biotechnology, Zephi explained as they waited for the High Council members to arrive. The entire chamber is a living entity, bred specifically to detect and amplify truth. Deception causes it physical pain, so it actively works to prevent lies. That's disturbing, Dr. Hayes whispered. Many species find it so, but the Kethmoran believe that truth is a living force that should not be constrained by artificial technology. Sarah felt her heart pounding as figures began to enter the chamber. The High Council consisted of 13 beings, each representing different aspects of galactic civilization. She recognized a few species types from their journey through the station, but several were completely alien to anything she had ever imagined. The first to speak was a being that looked like a tree made of crystal, with faceted bark that reflected rainbows of light. When it spoke, its voice resonated through the living chamber walls. "We are High Arbiter Shalthus of the Prismatic Gardens. This truth hearing has been called to address the classification of the species designation, humanity, of the restricted world Earth. HFY of the fourth circle of the Kithara will present the petition." "Are you ready?" HFY asked mentally. Sarah felt the weight of her entire species' future on her shoulders, as ready as anyone can be to speak for all of humanity. "Remember, in this chamber, they will feel everything you feel. Let them experience your emotions as well as your words." HFY stepped forward, his 6 limbs moving with a grace that Sarah was only now beginning to appreciate. As he began to speak, the chamber's bioluminescent veins pulsed brighter, and Sarah felt a strange, tingling sensation in her mind. "Honored Council," HFY said, his voice carrying clearly through the living space. "I stand before you not just as HFY of the Kithara, but as an advocate for the species called humanity. I petition for a complete review of their classification and immediate consideration for provisional council membership." A being that looked like a massive jellyfish floating in a containment field rippled with what might have been amusement. "HFY, you were exiled from your own people for your inconvenient truths. Why should we trust your judgment on this matter?" The chamber's walls pulsed, and Sarah felt a wave of pain flow through the living structure. She realized that the jellyfish being had just lied, or at least spoken with deceptive intent. "They know exactly why I was exiled," HFY's mental voice carried bitter amusement. "And they know it had nothing to do with poor judgment." "High Counselor Vashti," HFY replied calmly, "the chamber itself testifies to the deception in your question. You know precisely why I was exiled, because I revealed corruption among the Kithara High Circle. My judgment has never been questioned, only my discretion." The chamber's pain subsided, and Sarah felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Several council members were now paying closer attention. "Furthermore," HFY continued, "I do not ask you to trust my judgment alone. I ask you to experience the truth directly." He gestured towards Sarah. "High Council, I present Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel Harmony *. In your presence, I will demonstrate the true nature of humanity by sharing my truth-sight perception of this individual and her species." High Arbiter Shalthus's crystalline form shifted, refracting light in new patterns. "You propose to use your abilities in conjunction with the Truth Chamber's amplification. That is highly irregular." "But not illegal," pointed out a council member that appeared to be made of shifting smoke and starlight. "I am Counselor Nexthal of the Void Walkers, and I find myself curious about this proposal. What exactly do you believe your truth sight will reveal?" "Here we go," HFY told Sarah mentally. "Everything depends on what happens next." Sarah felt the chamber's attention focus on her like a physical weight. The bioluminescent veins pulsed brighter, and suddenly she could feel the presence of all 13 council members in her mind, not intrusively, but like distant observers watching through windows. "Captain Chen," HFY said aloud, "please tell the council about the day we first met." Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak, but as she did, she realized that the words were only part of what the council was experiencing. Through some combination of HFY's abilities and the chamber's technology, they were also feeling her emotions, seeing her memories, experiencing her perspective directly. "We found HFY's escape pod drifting in space," she began. "Our sensors showed that whatever was inside was alive but dying. According to our regulations, we should have reported the find to our authorities and maintained a safe distance." As she spoke, Sarah felt the council members experiencing her memory of that moment. The conflict between duty and compassion, the weight of command responsibility, the simple human instinct to help someone in need. "But someone was dying," she continued, "and I couldn't watch that happen when we had the power to help." "Show them the risk," HFY urged mentally. "Show them what you sacrificed." Sarah let the memories flow, the knowledge that her career could be ruined, that her crew could face court-martial, that first contact protocols existed for good reasons. But underneath all of that, stronger than all of that, was the simple certainty that letting someone die because of bureaucracy was wrong. "You violated your species' laws," observed High Counselor Vashti. How do we know this was not simply reckless behavior? Because, Sarah replied, I would do it again. Every human on my crew supported the decision once they understood what was at stake. We don't leave people to die, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Now came Zephai's mental voice. Let them see what I see. Suddenly the chamber was filled with a presence that Sarah recognized as Zephai's truth sight, but amplified beyond anything she had felt before. Through their bond, she could experience what he was experiencing, and she gasped at the intensity of it. When Zephai looked at her with his truth sight, he saw layers of reality that normal perception missed. He saw her surface thoughts and emotions, yes, but also the deeper patterns that drove her behavior. He saw the complex web of relationships that connected her to her crew, her family, her species. He saw the moral framework that guided her decisions, built from thousands of small choices and experiences. But more than that, he saw the potential inherent in human nature itself. He saw the way humans could adapt not just to new environments, but to new ideas, new ways of thinking, new moral challenges. He saw the fierce loyalty humans felt toward those they considered part of their group, and the remarkable way that their group could expand to include almost anyone who needed help. Most importantly, he saw the way humans could look at a situation that seemed hopeless and simply refuse to accept it as unchangeable. The council members were experiencing all of this directly, feeling the truth of human nature through Zephai's perception. Sarah could sense their shock, their confusion, and in some cases, their fear. This is unexpected, admitted Counselor Nexthal. The reports we received depicted humans as aggressive, territorial, destructive. Show them the full truth, Zephai told Sarah mentally. Show them why your species fights. Sarah thought about human history, the wars, the conflicts, the violence that had marked their development. For a moment, she felt despair. How could she explain humanity's darker impulses to beings who seemed to have evolved beyond such things? But then she realized that Zephai's truth sight was already showing them the deeper reality. Yes, humans fought, but they fought for reasons, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, to defend ideas they believed in, to prevent greater injustices. Even their wars were expressions of the same moral drive that had led Sarah to save Zephai's life. We fight when we have to, Sarah said simply, but what we're really fighting for is usually the right of others to live freely and safely. A new voice spoke, one that made the chamber's walls darken with instinctive fear. The speaker was a being Sarah hadn't noticed before, something that seemed to exist partially outside normal space, visible only as a shifting outline filled with distant stars. I am High Counselor Mordeth of the Entropy Collective. Your species has developed weapons capable of destroying your entire world. How do you explain this as moral behavior? Sarah felt the weight of nuclear weapons, chemical warfare, biological agents, all the terrible tools humanity had created. For a moment, the truth seemed overwhelming. But through Zephai's perception, she saw something else. She saw that every terrible weapon humanity had created had led to an equal or greater effort to control, contain, or eliminate it. She saw the peace movements, the disarmament treaties, the countless humans who had worked tirelessly to prevent the very catastrophes their species had made possible. We created terrible weapons, Sarah admitted. And then we created institutions, laws, and cultural taboos to control them. We learned to be afraid of our own power, and that fear taught us wisdom. Perfect came Zephai's mental voice, filled with pride and hope. Show them the choice your species made. High Council, Sarah continued, 40 years ago when your probes observed us, we were a species that had just learned to split the atom and reach for the stars. We could have used that power to destroy ourselves or to conquer others. Instead, we chose to explore. We chose to learn. We chose to hope for something better. Through the truth sight amplified by the chamber, the council members experienced humanity's actual choice. Not the theoretical decision, but the lived reality of billions of humans choosing cooperation over conflict, exploration over exploitation, hope over despair. High Arbiter Shalthus's crystalline form had shifted to patterns Sarah had never seen before. The truth sight shows remarkable complexity. This species exhibits chaotic development patterns that should have led to self-destruction, yet instead produced unprecedented adaptability. Indeed, agreed another council member, a being that looked like living geometry made of light. Their moral framework appears to be based on individual choice rather than species-wide programming. This is unique. High Counselor Vashti's containment field rippled with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as distress. Unique and unpredictable. How can we integrate a species that refuses to follow established development patterns? This is the heart of it, HFY told Sarah. Some of them see humanity's potential. Others fear what they cannot control. High Council, HFY said aloud, I propose that humanity's unpredictability is not a weakness to be feared, but a strength to be celebrated. Observe. The truth sight focused on Sarah again, but this time it showed something different. Instead of individual behavior, it showed the patterns of human civilization itself. The way ideas spread and evolved, the way problems led to solutions which led to new problems and better solutions. The council members experienced humanity's progression from cave paintings to digital art, from tribal councils to global institutions, from superstition to science. But more than the progression itself, they felt the driving force behind it, humanity's refusal to accept that things couldn't be improved. Every species in this chamber has reached a stable equilibrium, HFY continued. Your civilizations are mature, predictable, safe, but they are also static. When did any of your species last experience a genuine surprise? When did any of you last discover something that changed your fundamental understanding of reality? The chamber fell silent. Sarah could feel the council members considering this question and the discomfort many of them felt at the answer. Humanity has been space-capable for less than a century, HFY pressed on, yet they have already begun to transform their understanding of physics, biology, and consciousness itself. They don't just adapt to reality, they reimagine it. And this is supposed to be an argument for their inclusion. High Counselor Mordeth's outline flickered with what might have been contempt. You describe a species that will disrupt every stable system they encounter. Here *ZFY told Sarah mentally, this is where you show them what disruption can accomplish. Sarah thought about her crew aboard the Harmony 43 humans who had volunteered for a mission that might get them exiled from the only civilization they had ever known. She thought about the decision to save ZFY despite the risks. She thought about humanity's long history of individuals choosing to do what was right rather than what was safe. High Counselor, Sarah said, looking directly at the being of entropy and starlight, your objection assumes that stable systems are always good systems. But ZFY was exiled by a stable system that valued comfort over truth. How many other injustices exist in your civilization simply because no one is willing to disrupt the stability that protects them? The chamber's walls pulsed with deep, resonant notes that Sarah somehow understood as profound emotion. Through the truth sight, the council members were experiencing not just her words, but the reality behind them, the way comfortable systems could become stagnant systems, how stability could become stasis, how the absence of conflict could become the presence of injustice. Furthermore, Sarah continued, feeling the momentum building, humanity doesn't disrupt for the sake of disruption. We disrupt because we see possibilities for something better. Every human innovation, every social advancement, every moral evolution has come from someone asking, what if things could be different? High Arbiter Shalthus's crystalline form was now displaying patterns of light that seemed to mirror the chamber's own bioluminescent veins. Captain Chen, what you describe is not merely adaptation. It is active evolution. Your species chooses to become something new rather than accepting what it is. Yes, Sarah replied simply, that's exactly what we do. The moment of truth, *ZFY told her mentally. They understand what humanity represents. Now they must decide whether that represents hope or threat. High Council, ZFY said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Humanity stands at a crossroads. They can continue to develop in isolation, eventually reaching their own stable equilibrium. Or they can join the galactic community and help all of us remember what it means to grow, to change, to become something better than what we were. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle rhythm of its breathing. Sarah could feel the weight of decision pressing down on all of them. She had said everything she could say, shown everything she could show. Now the future of her species rested in the hands or appendages of beings she had never even imagined a week ago. Whatever happens, ZFY told her mentally, know that you have represented your species with honor. The truth has been spoken. Now we discover whether the galaxy is ready to hear it. High Arbiter Shalthus's crystal form began to pulse with a new rhythm, one that gradually synchronized with the chamber's own breathing. The council will deliberate. Captain Chen, Zephi of the Cathara, you will be informed of our decision within one standard cycle. As they were escorted from the truth chamber, Sarah felt as if she had just run a marathon. The intensity of having her thoughts and emotions exposed to 13 alien minds was exhausting, but also strangely liberating. How do you think it went? She asked Zephi mentally. I believe we have given them much to think about. Whether that leads to wisdom or fear, that remains to be seen. Any regrets? Zephi's mental voice carried warm amusement. Only that it has taken the galaxy this long to discover humanity. You are going to change everything, Sarah Chen. The only question is whether the council will be wise enough to be part of that change. As they walked back to their quarters, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their real journey was just beginning. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she started to drift off, she felt Zephi's restless energy through their bond. When dawn came to station, Omega-7 marked more by the shift in the station's lighting than by any natural sun. She found him standing at the viewport, staring out at Nexus Prime. They're afraid, he said without turning around. I can sense it through the quantum resonance field that surrounds this place. The council is divided. Afraid of what? We showed them exactly who humanity is. That's precisely what frightens them. Zephi's three eyes finally focused on her. For the first time in millennia, they've encountered a species that might actually change the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Change is terrifying when you've grown comfortable with the status quo. Dr. Hayes joined them, carrying a cup of what passed for coffee in the station's replicators. Any word from the council? Not yet, Sarah replied. But Zephi seems to think the deliberations aren't going smoothly. That could be good or bad, Dr. Hayes mused. Either they're seriously considering our petition, or they're figuring out how to reject it without looking like monsters. Both, I suspect, Zephi observed. The council operates by consensus. For a decision this significant, all 13 members must agree. Even one holdout can block the petition. Before Sarah could respond, their door chimed. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice came through the intercom system. Captain, we've got company. A ship just docked at the station registry shows it as Cathara Diplomatic Vessel Silent Truth *. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, and through their bond, she sensed Zephi's sudden spike of fear and anger. The Cathara delegation, he said grimly. They must have received word about the hearing. This complicates matters significantly. Why, I thought you were still a Cathara citizen. Technically, yes. But the Cathara High Circle has significant influence with the Council, if they're here to oppose humanity's petition. They can't override a truth hearing, can they? No, but they can present their own evidence and testimony. And unlike us, they have the political connections to ensure their voice is heard. An hour later, Sarah found herself face-to-face with the beings responsible for Zephi's exile. The Cathara delegation consisted of 3 individuals, each one radiating the kind of authority that came from generations of political power. The leader introduced herself as High Circle member Veltara, a being whose 6 limbs moved with perfect coordination, and whose 3 eyes held the cold intelligence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The other 2, Morvek and Silthes, flanked her with the precise positioning that spoke of long practice in intimidation. Do not let them provoke you, Zephi warned mentally as they met in one of the station's diplomatic conference rooms. They are masters at finding psychological pressure points. Zephi, Veltara said without preamble, her mental voice carrying undertones of disdain that made Sarah's teeth ache. Still pursuing your misguided crusade, I see. High Circle member Veltara Zephi replied formally. How unexpected to see you so far from the safety of Cathara Prime. We received word of your performance before the High Council, advocating for a restricted species, bonding with primitive aliens. Really, Zephi, even by your standards, this is excessive. Sarah felt anger building in her chest, but Zephi's calming presence kept her from saying something she might regret. Instead, she spoke with careful formality. High Circle member Veltara, I am Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel Harmony *. I understand you have concerns about our petition to the Council. Veltara's three eyes focused on Sarah with an intensity that felt like being examined by a microscope. Fascinating. The primitive speaks with reasonable eloquence. Tell me, creature, do you understand what you have done by bonding with one of the Cathara? I understand that Zephi was dying, and that I chose to help him. How charmingly simple. You understand nothing. Veltara's mental voice carried contempt so pure it was almost artistic. Cathara bonds are sacred connections, reserved for those who have proven their worth through generations of discipline and wisdom. By accepting such a bond, you have committed what my people consider a form of spiritual blasphemy. Sarah felt Zephi's surge of protective anger through their connection, but she also sensed something else, a deep sadness that went beyond personal hurt. Tell them the real reason you're here, Zephi said aloud, his mental voice carrying steel. Tell them about the hegemony. The reaction was immediate. All three Cathara delegation members went completely still, their mental presence withdrawing so completely that even Sarah could sense the absence. What's the hegemony? Dr. Hayes asked quietly. Veltara's eyes flicked between Zephi and Sarah with what could only be described as calculation. Zephi, you would not dare. I would dare almost anything to prevent what's coming, Zephi replied. Captain Chen, the hegemony is a confederation of species that believe galactic civilization has become weak and stagnant. They seek to impose what they call natural order, the strong ruling the weak, resources flowing to those with the power to take them. Sounds like imperialism, Sarah observed. Precisely, and they view the Council's inclusive policies as evidence of civilization's decay. Zephi's three eyes fixed on Veltara. What our honored High Circle member hasn't mentioned is that the Cathara High Circle has been in secret negotiations with the hegemony for the past 6 cycles. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Hayes looked shocked, but Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. That's why you were really exiled, she said. You discovered the negotiations. I discovered more than negotiations, Zephi replied grimly. I discovered that certain members of the High Circle believe the hegemony represents the future of galactic civilization. They view the Council's eventual collapse as inevitable and are positioning themselves to survive the transition. Veltara's mental presence suddenly blazed with fury. You treasonous fool! You would destroy everything our people have built on the testimony of primitives. Actually, Sarah said calmly, I think you've just confirmed everything he said. The Cathara delegation realized their mistake too late. In a truth-hearing environment, even conversations outside the chamber carried weight if they revealed deception or hidden agendas. The truth is, Zephi continued relentlessly, that the High Circle opposes humanity's inclusion in the Council not because they fear human unpredictability, but because human moral courage represents everything the hegemony stands against. They know that a species willing to risk everything to save a dying stranger will never accept the hegemony's vision of natural order. This is madness, Morvek spoke for the first time, his mental voice shaking. The hegemony controls 17 systems and grows stronger every day. The Council's time is ending whether we acknowledge it or not. And there it is, Zephi said with satisfaction. The real reason for your presence here. You're not trying to protect the galaxy from humanity. You're trying to protect your arrangement with the hegemony. Sarah felt the truth of it settling into her bones. The Cathara weren't here to oppose humanity out of concern for galactic stability. They were here because humanity represented a threat to their carefully laid plans for survival in a galaxy dominated by authoritarian powers. Captain Chen, Veltara said, switching to spoken words for the first time, you cannot possibly understand the complexities of galactic politics. Your species has existed in isolation. You know nothing of the forces that shape civilization on this scale. You're right, Sarah admitted. We don't understand galactic politics, but we understand bullies, and we understand the people who make deals with bullies to save their own skin. Beautifully said, Zephi's mental voice carried warm approval. High Circle member Veltara, you have just demonstrated exactly why humanity deserves Council membership. In 5 minutes of conversation, Captain Chen has identified the core moral issue that the High Circle has been avoiding for 6 cycles. The conference room fell silent except for the station's ambient humming. Sarah could sense the Cathara delegation's growing desperation as they realized how badly their intervention had backfired. "There's something else, isn't there?" Sarah said, following an intuition she couldn't quite name. "The hegemony isn't just growing stronger, they're planning something specific." The way Veltara's mental presence flickered told Sarah she had hit the mark. "Tell her," Zephi said quietly. "Tell her what the hegemony plans to do with species that refuse to submit." "I don't know what you're talking about," Veltara said aloud, but her mental voice was carefully shielded now. "The hegemony calls it the cleansing protocol," Zephi explained to Sarah. "Species that refuse to accept hegemony rule are not just conquered. They are eliminated. Entire civilizations wiped out to serve as examples to others." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. "How many species have they eliminated?" "3 so far. The Council believes they were destroyed by natural disasters or internal conflicts. The hegemony is very careful to make it look accidental. And the Cathara High Circle knows this. Some of them, others suspect. All of them have convinced themselves that cooperation is the only path to survival." Sarah looked at the 3 Cathara delegation members, seeing them clearly for the first time. They weren't evil beings plotting galactic conquest. They were afraid beings who had chosen compromise over resistance, survival over principle. "What happens to humanity if the Council rejects our petition?" she asked. Veltara's silence was answer enough. "The hegemony has already classified humanity as a potential threat," Zephi said gently. "Our isolation protocol was protection as much as quarantine. If we are denied Council membership, the hegemony will consider us fair game," Sarah finished. "Within a decade, perhaps 2. They move slowly, but they are very thorough." Sarah felt the weight of her species' future pressing down on her shoulders again, but this time it was different. This wasn't just about joining a galactic community anymore. This was about survival. "Dr. Hayes," she said quietly, "please return to our quarters and prepare a detailed report on everything we've just learned. Lieutenant Rodriguez needs to know that we may be dealing with more than just diplomatic complications." As Dr. Hayes left, Sarah turned back to the Cathara delegation. "High Circle member Veltara, I have a question for you. I am not obligated to answer questions from primitives. When the hegemony finishes conquering the species that won't submit, what makes you think they'll honor their agreements with the ones that did?" The question hung in the air like a weapon. Sarah could sense the delegation members' mental shields wavering as they considered implications they had clearly tried not to think about. "History is full of stories about people who made deals with tyrants to save themselves," Sarah continued. "How many of those stories have happy endings?" "She speaks truth," came a new mental voice. Sarah was surprised to realize it was Silthes, the delegation member who had remained silent until now. "The hegemony honors only strength. What happens to us when we are no longer useful allies but potential rivals?" "Silthes," Veltara's mental voice cracked like a whip. "You will not be swayed by primitive philosophy." "Perhaps," Silthes replied. "It is time we considered whether primitive philosophy might contain more wisdom than sophisticated cowardice." The delegation's unity was cracking, and Sarah could sense Zephi's growing hope through their bond. If even one member of the Cathara High Circle could be convinced to support humanity's petition, it would carry enormous weight with the Council. "Silthes," Sarah said carefully, "what would it take to convince the High Circle that resistance is possible?" "Proof," came the immediate reply. "Proof that the Council can stand against the hegemony. Proof that species like yours can make a difference. Proof that the galaxy has not grown too weak to defend itself." Sarah felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I think we might be able to provide that." "What do you have in mind?" Zephi asked mentally. "I'm thinking it's time to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten something that humanity considers worth protecting." The conference room's atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as an intimidation session had become something approaching an alliance. Veltara looked furious, Morvek looked confused, but Silthes was leaning forward with what Sarah was learning to recognize as intense interest. "Captain Chen," Silthes said aloud, "if humanity were to receive Provisional Council membership, what would your species do about the hegemony?" Sarah thought about her crew aboard the Harmony about the billions of humans back on Earth who had never heard of the hegemony or the Council, or any of the cosmic threats gathering in the darkness between stars. She thought about humanity's long history of facing impossible odds and finding ways to survive, adapt, and ultimately prevail. "We'd do what humans always do when faced with bullies," she said simply. "We'd figure out how to stop them." Just like that, Veltara's mental voice carried disbelief. "Just like that? You have no weapons that could threaten hegemony fleets. You have no allies among the established powers. You barely understand galactic technology. What could your species possibly do?" Sarah exchanged a mental conversation with Zephi, sharing thoughts and ideas at the speed of thought. When they were finished, she looked directly at Veltara with absolute confidence. "High Circle member, you've made the same mistake that tyrants throughout history have made. You're assuming that the way things are is the way things have to be, but humanity specializes in proving that assumption wrong." "This should be interesting," Zephi added with mental amusement. "Captain Chen, shall we show them what human unpredictability actually looks like?" "I think it's time." As Sarah began to outline humanity's approach to the hegemony problem, she could see the Cathara delegation's worldview beginning to shift. For the first time in cycles, they were hearing someone talk about resistance not as a noble but futile gesture, but as a practical solution to an engineering problem. It was, Sarah reflected, a very human way to look at existential threats. And if the Council was wise enough to accept humanity's membership, the hegemony was about to discover why underestimating human ingenuity was such a dangerous mistake. The High Council's decision came sooner than expected. Sarah was in the middle of explaining humanity's theoretical approach to asymmetric warfare when Sub-Administrator Vexthal's voice echoed through their quarters communication system. "Captain Chen, Zephi of the Cathara, High Circle member Veltara and delegation, your immediate presence is requested in the Great Assembly Chamber. The High Council has reached a decision regarding the Humanity Petition." The Great Assembly Chamber was vastly different from the Intimate Truth Chamber. It was a massive amphitheater that could hold thousands of beings, with seating arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. Representatives from dozens of species filled the seats, all of them focused on the small group making their way to the center platform. "This is unusual," Zephi observed mentally. "Truth-hearing decisions are typically announced in private. The fact that they're making this public suggests." "Suggests what?" "That whatever they've decided will have implications far beyond humanity's membership status." As they reached the central platform, Sarah saw that all 13 High Council members were present, arranged in a semicircle that somehow managed to be both impressive and intimidating. High Arbiter Shalthus stepped forward, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns. "Citizens of the Council," she began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the vast space, "we have deliberated on the petition of the species designation, humanity, for Provisional Council membership. This decision carries implications that extend beyond simple membership protocols." The chamber fell silent except for the soft sounds of various species breathing, humming, or other life-sustaining activities. The evidence presented in truth hearing has revealed several concerning facts. First, that certain established Council member species have been engaging in secret negotiations with entities hostile to Council principles. Second, that the classification of humanity was based on incomplete and biased information. Third, that galactic civilization faces a threat that has been deliberately concealed from general Council awareness. Sarah felt a ripple of shock and concern flow through the assembled representatives. Many of them were clearly learning about the hegemony for the first time. "Therefore," High Arbiter Shalthus continued, "the High Council announces the following decisions. High Circle member Veltara of the Cathara and her associates will be held for formal investigation regarding their species' unauthorized negotiations with hostile entities." Security beings that Sarah hadn't noticed before moved smoothly to surround the Cathara delegation. Veltara's mental protests were cut off by some kind of telepathic dampening field. Second, the classification of humanity is hereby changed from restricted dangerous to provisional member extraordinary circumstances. Captain Sarah Chen and her crew will serve as humanity's initial ambassadors to the Council. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds as hundreds of different species expressed surprise, approval, or concern in their various ways. Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief and had to grab HFY's arm for support. "Congratulations," he said mentally, his thoughts warm with pride. "Your species has just taken its first step onto the galactic stage." But High Arbiter Shalthus wasn't finished. Third, and most significantly, the High Council formally recognizes the threat posed by the entity known as the hegemony and declares a state of civilizational emergency. All Council resources will be mobilized to address this threat. Finally, the crystal being's voice took on an almost musical quality. The High Council requests that humanity's representatives assist in developing defensive strategies against hegemony expansion. Their unique perspective and problem-solving capabilities are deemed essential to the survival of free galactic civilization. As the assembly chamber erupted in discussion, Sarah found herself surrounded by beings she couldn't have imagined a month ago. Representatives from dozens of species wanted to introduce themselves, ask questions about humanity, or simply satisfy their curiosity about the new members. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" HFY observed with mental amusement. "A little, but also amazing." Sarah watched a delegation of beings that looked like living music introduce themselves to Dr. Hayes. "This is what we've been missing, isn't it? All of this diversity, all of these perspectives." Indeed, and now humanity will add its own voice to the symphony. 6 months later, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Council's primary strategic planning station, watching human ships work alongside alien vessels in the largest military exercise in galactic history. The sight still took her breath away. The human contribution to the anti-hegemony alliance had been exactly what HFY predicted: beautifully chaotic. While other species had focused on building bigger ships and more powerful weapons, humans had approached the problem from entirely different angles. They had developed new communication protocols that allowed real-time coordination between species with incompatible technologies. They had created cultural exchange programs that helped different species understand each other's strategic thinking. Most importantly, they had introduced the concept of adaptive resistance, the idea that the best way to fight a powerful enemy was to become too unpredictable to defeat. "Captain," Lieutenant Rodriguez said as he joined her at the viewport, "Admiral Vega wants to know if you're ready for the mission briefing." Sarah nodded, but didn't immediately turn away from the view. In the distance, she could see the massive construction yards where the new class of hybrid vessels were being built, ships that combined the best technologies from dozens of species with human innovation and creativity. "Rodriguez, do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't stopped to investigate that escape pod?" "Every day, Captain, though I have to say I'm glad we did." As a my asterisk came a familiar mental voice. HFY appeared beside them, moving with the easy grace that had become second nature since his recovery, though I suspect the galaxy would have found another way to discover humanity's potential eventually. Maybe, but would it have been in time? That question had become increasingly relevant as intelligence about the hegemony's plans had emerged. The hostile confederation was larger and more dangerous than anyone had realized, and their timeline for galactic conquest was measured in years rather than decades. But the Council's response had been equally unprecedented. For the first time in millennia, the diverse species of galactic civilization were working together not just for trade and cultural exchange, but for survival. And at the center of that cooperation was humanity's gift for finding solutions that no one else had considered. "Captain Chen," came a voice behind them. Sarah turned to see Sylthes approaching, now wearing the insignia of a council investigator. The Cathara had proven instrumental in exposing the hegemony's infiltration network and had become one of humanity's strongest advocates. "Sylthes has news *ZFY observed mentally. I can sense her excitement." "The investigation into hegemony operations has yielded significant results," Sylthes announced. "We have identified 17 council species with members involved in collaboration agreements. More importantly, we have discovered the location of the hegemony's primary fleet staging area." Sarah felt a familiar mix of anticipation and determination. "How long do we have?" "The hegemony plans to begin their final expansion phase within 18 standard months. However, our intelligence suggests they believe the Council is unaware of their timeline. They are not yet prepared for organized resistance." "Then we have an opportunity." "More than an opportunity, *ZFY added. We have the element of surprise, technological superiority through cooperation, and something the hegemony has never faced before, a truly united galactic civilization. As they made their way to the Strategic Planning Center, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that day when they had found a dying alien in a drifting escape pod. Earth had become the unofficial headquarters for interspecies cooperation research. Human diplomats were facilitating negotiations between species that had been in conflict for centuries. Human engineers were working with alien scientists to develop technologies that neither could have created alone. Most remarkably, human cultural influences were spreading throughout the galaxy. The concept of organized chaos had been adopted by 17 different species. The human practice of thinking outside the box had become a formal problem-solving methodology taught in council academies. Even human art and entertainment had found eager audiences among species that had never experienced anything quite like human creativity. "Captain," Dr. Hayes said as they entered the planning center, "you need to see this." The strategic display showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with colored indicators representing different types of